Is Russia's main effort in Pokrovsk collapsing amid a manpower shortage? Just how bad is it looking for Russian armed forces? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Hit subscribe. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is actually pretty wild because we know that the main effort of the Russian advance over the last really 12 months has been to take Pokrovsk, and they have been encircling it in a sort of pincer movement since then. Now, we saw a minor Russian breakthrough here in kind of the northernmost part of this pincer movement, and it sort of makes sense because Ukrainians had thinly manned this line because, well, it doesn't make any sense for Russia to advance there. But as we talked about, likely in preparation for peace talks, Vladimir Putin wanted to tout a big win. And so he had a sudden hard, really right-hand turn for his troops and pushing into this Vesele area. Now, here's where things get interesting, though, is obviously we see here that the Ukrainian forces blunted the advance and have cut off Russian forces here. And what I think the takeaway is that this whole area is kind of a gray zone. I think its advances are unconfirmed because, frankly, there is Russian drones and Ukrainian drones just simply tearing this whole area up. We've heard from other sources that 10 plus kilometers of kind of no man's land is actually pretty normal, and that the real number might even be even deeper than that. But where things get kind of more interesting is if you look over the last several days. You can see here that a few days later, you saw Russian forces getting driven out of Volodymyrivka, right? And a deeper area of the lines being listed as contested, right, near this Novotoretsky. And what's most exceptional about this is that even if you assume the entire gray zone is contested, that's only 12 kilometers, which is comfortably where a drone team can strike any target within this area. And this is a huge problem because what you can do then is effectively cut off this entire Russian prong. And you can see that that looks to be increasingly like the Ukrainian strategy, because here is yesterday's update with a lot of additional clearing of the Russian forces, right? You can see here a lot more areas are listed as contested. Russian forces basically being stuck in, again, an ever narrowing kind of field, not just here, but along this entire front prong of their advance. And you can see that the Russian held areas are now really just tiny, only a 5 kilometer stretch over this river. And this is a crucial vulnerability for this, again, forward prong of the Russian advance, because if Ukrainian forces can destroy these bridges and reduce the ability of Russian forces to cross quickly, what they can then do is simply monitor this river with drones for any attempts to cross it. Once they see someone crossing, they simply strike them with fiber optic FPV drones. This strike capability would produce, well, what we're seeing here, which is a steady collapse of Russian armed forces in regions resupplied by this effort, right? And I think, though, this is reflective of a deeper reality, because normally the Russian strategy is simply to take it, to throw bodies at the problem and hope that the Ukrainians run out of drones to strike before the Russians run out of human beings to throw at the problem. The issue is Russia appears to be running out of human beings to throw at the problem. In the second quarter of 2025, this is according to opposition outlet Medusa, only 40,000 people received sign-on bonuses for contracts, whereas Russia's Ministry of Defense. Now, we've talked about the fact that there are a number of other sort of unofficial recruitment channels through private companies, but these number only around 1,000 a month. So really a rounding error. The majority of combat power on the front lines is coming from these Russian Defense Ministry contracts. And this is what's troubling, is that 37,000 sounds like a lot, but remember, that is for a quarter, right? That is for an entire fiscal quarter, 3 months, which means, right, the autocrat's greatest fear, math, right? You could see that 37,000, and let's actually add in 2,000 recruited non-military PMC fighters. You divide that by the 3 months, and you see that Russia's recruiting just 13,000 new troops a month. For context, their target recruitment number in 2024 was 20 to 30,000 troops a month. So you can see that this is a recruitment rate potentially of less than half of what the Russian armed forces need, or at least needed in 2024, right? Now, I want to be clear that the Russian armed forces continue to make advances in other places, but these are places that are deprioritized by Ukraine. For example, we've seen some of these advances near Kupiansk. We've also seen most recently some advances near this area, Seversk, somewhere that's been a relatively quiet area of the front line. But what's crucial is these look more and more like opportunities and not part of a larger strategic effort. And this slower Russian army recruitment, again, marked, according to Medusa, the lowest number of new recruits in 2 years. Fewer only signed up in the last quarter, or the second quarter of 2023, when Moscow really rolled out its lucrative contract bonuses. And this is, again, we're seeing only 127,000 people getting sign-on bonuses in the whole first 6 months of 2025, which is something like a 20% decrease from the same period a year before. Now, Dmitry Medvedev claims that 200,000 people have signed up contracts in the first half of 2025. But again, the budget numbers don't lie. And that would mean that huge portions of people are either not receiving their basic sign-on bonuses, or that, hear me out, Medvedev might just be a total liar. Another source of key Russian recruitment has been foreigners, but increasingly we're seeing the Indian government, a major source of recruitment for the Russian war effort, warning its people, warning its citizens, listen, do not join the Russian army, even if they say it is for example, Indian men are sometimes hired as what they call army security helpers. So they're sometimes told that they're going to be, for example, a security guard at a military base, which is something that Russia probably really has. The U.S. military really has it. We had it in Afghanistan. They were lower risk jobs, but that is just a lie, right? Modi reportedly visited Moscow in 2024, and then Russia admitted it's no longer allowing Indians in its army. But once again, the Indians are saying, listen, we're seeing reports of nationals being recruited into the Russian army, and they say that we urge all Indian nationals to stay away from any offers to join the Russian army, as this is, of course, fraught with danger. So this, I think, is a sign and emblematic that things are not going nearly as well for Russia as it hopes, right? And their continual position that they are going to continue the war no matter what might be true, but Vladimir Putin is increasingly finding himself boxed in an economy that's failing, gas prices that are running out of control, and anyone who is willing to sign up, no matter how lucrative the contracts are, Russia might have exhausted all those people. Again, 2022, where the Russian armed forces, the active duty armed forces went in, they've been annihilated. 2023 was a year of Russian mobilized troops, conscripts fighting for Wagner. They were all annihilated. Now we're relying on very highly paid conscripts who basically know they're being sent into the meat grinder. But at some point, right, like there is no amount of money you could offer me that would make me want to go and fight in the Russian armed forces. The number does not exist. You could promise me and my family the entire GDP of the Russian state, and I wouldn't do it, because being alive is pretty good. And I think Russia is finally starting to end up in that population, right? Now, there's always going to be some Russian 18-year-olds who turn 18. There's always going to be some Russians who get into truly dire straits and decide to join the army, but that is not a reliable method to sustain their combat power, as we are seeing. And the longer these high casualty units exist, and remember, the more casualties they take, the more they have to be recruited directly into those roles, right? The average Russian drone unit, for example, is probably having very low attrition rates, meaning that fewer and fewer people are brought in to backfill those drone units. And instead, joining the Russian army means joining the Russian infantry, and joining the Russian infantry means being in a meat wave assault. So as the reputation of the army becomes clear, that it means only certain extermination, you're going to see fewer and fewer people who sign up because nobody's going to delude themselves into thinking they are going to live. And so you're going to have to see Russia, again, turning to its international partners to try to recruit. But even that seems difficult, right? But they may see North Korea, for example, deploy more troops. But even the North Koreans are reportedly deploying only around 10,000 troops, or one additional month of recruitment based on current numbers. So this is increasingly looking like a crisis, not just of economic means, but also a crisis of recruitment. Now, if you guys, of course, appreciate my independent reporting, you can become a member at combatvetnews.com. This is where my videos drop twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're going to be taking a look at some exclusive combat footage today, as well as answering your Q&As. So if you want to support me and support the channel and support what we do here, become a member. A huge thank you to, of course, our Colonel tier members, guys like Tom Anderson, Dan Cochran, Jalen Gow, Officer Murley, Deborah Oppenheimer, Paul, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. Thanks. Couldn't do it without you. See ya.